Welcome to the Steampunk Years, Volume 3. Let's continue the journey. The air inside was warm, not just physically, but in a way that made Zeke's chest feel lighter, like stepping into a home he didn't know he'd missed. The room was nothing like the rest of the base. Instead of sterile metal walls and harsh lighting, the space felt alive. The first thing Zeke noticed was the flowers. They were everywhere. Some were arranged in delicate vases, placed with care on wooden tables. Others hung from the walls in dried bouquets. Lavender, rosemary, roses, wildflowers of every color. Their soft, earthy perfume blended with the scent of tea and old books. A knitted blanket draped over the back of a plush sofa, and a small handmade pillow rested in its corner. On the far side of the room, a wooden bookshelf overflowed with tattered novels, their spines worn from use. A music box sat on a side table, half open, its tiny golden gears glinting in the low light. The whole room felt like it belonged somewhere else, somewhere softer, safer. And there, sitting among it all, was Snow. She was not alone. A woman sat beside her, not a soldier, not a scientist. She had warm eyes, gentle hands. One of those hands was wrapped around Snow's own, fingers laced together, thumb moving in slow, comforting strokes. The woman looked up as they entered, but didn't speak. It was Snow who noticed them first. She lifted her head, and for a moment she looked completely normal. Pale skin, dark curls spilling over her shoulders, a single glowing blue eye. Then, the flicker. For just a heartbeat, the edges of her blurred. Not like motion, but like existence itself wavered. She wasn't always there. Zeke's stomach twisted. He had seen death before, but Snow wasn't dead. Not entirely. She blinked. Then she smiled. "There you are." The way she said it sent a strange warmth through him. Not a greeting, not a question. A statement. Zeke hesitated. Yeah, here I am." Snow tilted her head slightly, watching him the way someone might watch a memory they weren't sure was real. Trenholm exhaled behind him, impatient already. But before he could speak, the caretaker squeezed Snow's hand. "Take your time, sweetheart." Her voice was soft, patient. Zeke frowned. "You her nurse or something?" The woman smiled. "Something like that." Her grip on Snow's hand never loosened. Not restraining but comforting, like she was grounding her in place, keeping her from drifting somewhere unseen. Trenholm cleared his throat, stepping forward. "We need to discuss the fractures." Snow exhaled softly, but her gaze never left Zeke. "You're always in such a hurry," she murmured. Zeke blinked. "Me or him?" Snow smiled like he'd said something funny. "Both." The caretaker stroked her hand again. "We don't have to rush, love. Just tell them what you know." Snow considered that, then turned back to Zeke. "They're hurting." Zeke frowned. "Who?" She looked at him like he'd asked the wrong question. "The fractures." Silence. Zeke had seen what fractures did. They tore through landscapes, people, time itself, but he'd never thought of them as something that could hurt. Snow lowered her gaze, like she could feel them even now, aching somewhere beyond sight. "That's why I mend them," she said simply. Trenholm exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "We need you in the field. Zeke and Cogwave are leading the next phase." The caretaker flinched slightly at the bluntness of it, but Snow didn't. She just sighed, tracing patterns into the fabric of the sofa. Her form flickered again. Here, not here. Shifting in a way that made Zeke's head ache if he looked too long. Then she looked up, and for the first time, there was something like certainty in her gaze. "You're going to ask me to come with you," she murmured. Zeke hesitated. "Yeah." Her fingers tightened around the caretaker's hand. The woman, whoever she was, gave her a soft squeeze in return. No words, just understanding. Snow smiled faintly. "Then we should go." Zeke blinked. "That's it? No questions?" Snow shook her head. "I trust you." And for some reason that hit harder than it should have. The moment the door slid shut behind them, Zeke exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. They were in one of the restricted corridors now, away from Snow's flower-filled sanctuary. The warm, earthy scent of tea and dried petals was already fading, replaced by the cold steel and oil of the base's inner walls. Zeke turned on Trenholm, jabbing a finger toward the door. "What the hell was that?" Trenholm barely glanced at him, already walking. "That was your new team member." Zeke scoffed, falling into step beside him. "She is in no condition to go into a combat zone. You expect me to hold her hand the entire trip? Trenholm's expression remained unreadable. No, that's what her caretaker is for. Zeke slowed. Wait, the lady in there? You're sending her too? Trenholm gave a slight nod. She's been with Snow since the incident. If Snow goes, she goes. Zeke huffed, shaking his head. Great. So now I'm leading a field team with an emotionally unstable ghost woman and her babysitter. This just keeps getting better. You don't have a choice. Zeke stopped walking. The hell I don't. Trenholm turned to face him, arms crossed. Tell me, Watts, do you have a better alternative? Zeke clenched his jaw. The problem was, he didn't. Snow was the only known person capable of mending fractures. If they were going to stop the machine from tearing the world apart, they needed her. But it still felt wrong. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't even all there. Zeke sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. She needs time. Trenholm's expression didn't change. She has a week, maybe 2. Zeke shook his head. Not enough. Trenholm was already walking again. Then make it enough. Zeke let out a slow breath, staring down the Admiral. Give me the time. Trenholm raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? Zeke folded his arms. A week or 2? Not enough. She's not a soldier. She's barely holding herself together. If you want her in the field, she needs more than time. She needs someone actually helping her adjust. Trenholm studied him for a long moment. And you're volunteering? Zeke exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Yeah, me and Cogwave. We stay here. We help with the transition. The Admiral's eyes flickered to Cogwave, who had been listening in silence. The machine's optics pulsed faintly. Query, will our assistance expedite mission readiness? Zeke smirked. That's the idea, brass buddy. Cogwave processed for a moment, then nodded. Accepted. I will monitor Snow's stability patterns and behavioral shifts. Trenholm sighed. You're wasting time. Zeke shrugged. Maybe. But if we don't do this right, we'll be wasting a hell of a lot more. The Admiral rubbed his temple, then finally waved a hand. Fine. 2 weeks. That's all you get. Zeke nodded, then turned back toward Snow's door. Now he just had to figure out how the hell he was supposed to help a half-dead woman prepare for war. A day had passed. Zeke walked with his usual stride, firm, deliberate, but the closer he got to the door, the more he felt out of place. The walls here weren't cold metal or reinforced concrete like the rest of the base. Instead, they were painted in soft hues, adorned with shelves lined with books and small, delicate trinkets. The air smelled different too, warmer, floral. Just before he reached the door, a staff member stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Sir, we recommend keeping Cogwave out for now. Zeke frowned. Why? She's sensitive to certain presences. He might disrupt her energy. Zeke rolled his eyes. He's got energy now? The staff member didn't waver. Just trust me on this. With a quiet exhale, Zeke nodded. He wasn't here to argue. As the door slid open, he stepped inside alone. The room was unlike anything else in the base. Soft fabrics draped over worn furniture, a plush sofa resting beneath a low-lit lamp. A small wooden table sat in the center, steam curling up from a delicate porcelain teapot. The shelves were filled with books, some stacked neatly, others placed haphazardly as if pulled out and returned dozens of times. This place wasn't just lived in, it was cared for. Abby, Snow's caretaker, sat beside her on the sofa. She looked up as Zeke entered, her expression unreadable. Snow was seated with her hands gently resting atop a book in her lap, fingers lightly tracing the worn edges. Abby turned to her. Do you want me to stay? Snow blinked slowly, considering. Then, with a soft shake of her head, she murmured, It's all right. Abby hesitated, then glanced at Zeke before standing. I'll be right outside. She brushed Snow's shoulder lightly before stepping away. Zeke caught the way Snow leaned into that touch, drawing warmth from it as if reluctant to let go. As Abby exited, Zeke's eyes flicked toward the book in Snow's hands. Its spine was cracked, the cover faded, its pages well worn. It had been read over and over, carried through time like an old memory never quite ready to be left behind. He nodded toward it. That your favorite? Snow lifted the book gently, running her fingers over the cover. It's about a girl who gets lost in the fog and finds something waiting for her on the other side. Zeke tilted his head. What does she find? Snow's lips pressed together. For a long moment she didn't answer. Finally she whispered, something she didn't expect. She didn't elaborate. Snow reached for the teapot, her movements smooth and practiced. She poured tea into 2 delicate cups, sliding one toward him. "It helps with the weight of things," Zeke smirked, picking up the cup. "You trying to cure my stress?" Snow tilted her head slightly. "Would you let me?" He huffed a quiet laugh and took a sip. The tea was warm, smooth, carrying a faint floral note. He wouldn't admit it, but it was nice. Soothing, in a way he hadn't expected. Snow set her cup down, watching him. "You're uncomfortable here." Zeke exhaled, rubbing his thumb along the side of the porcelain. "I'm not a soft space kind of guy." "And yet," Snow said softly, "you came anyway?" Zeke leaned back in his chair. "I came to see if you're actually ready for what's coming." Snow's expression didn't change. "And what do you think?" Zeke studied her carefully. He sighed. "I think you're used to healing things. But this mission isn't about fixing. It's about stopping something before it's too late." Snow's fingers traced the edges of her book again. "And you think I can't?" Zeke didn't answer immediately. He wasn't sure yet. Finally, he muttered, "I think you're different from anyone I've ever worked with." A small, knowing smile crossed her lips. "That's not an answer." "No," he admitted. "It's not." For the first time, amusement flickered in her eyes. They sat in silence for a moment, drinking their tea. The steam curled between them, warm and steady. Zeke glanced around the room again, at the soft lights, the gentle touch of something more human than anything he had encountered in a long time. Finally, he muttered, "All right, maybe this wasn't a total waste of time." Snow tilted her head. "No?" He exhaled, setting his cup down. "Tea's not bad." She smiled. "It helps with the weight of things. A beat." Then, Zeke shook his head. "You talk like poetry." Snow laughed, soft but real. "Maybe that's how I survive." And for now, that was enough. It started with a passing conversation. Zeke was used to the base's rigid schedule, the endless cycle of patrols, debriefs, and late-night strategy discussions. But after a few days of meeting Snow and Cogwave for tea, something shifted. Abby stopped him in the hallway. "Do you mind talking later?" she asked, her tone careful but firm. "I know a place on base." Zeke raised an eyebrow but didn't immediately refuse. "All right, when?" "After dinner. I'll meet you by the East Wing." She didn't wait for a reply, already walking off, her presence lingering like an unspoken question. The pub was one of the few places where soldiers could relax, drink, and forget, if only for a little while. The air smelled of whiskey, sweat, and the faint trace of burnt cigars. Low chatter hummed beneath the clinking of glasses, and every table was packed with off-duty personnel unwinding after long shifts. When Zeke arrived, Abby was already there. She leaned against the bar, glass in hand, watching the room with a quiet sharpness that told him she was always thinking, always observing. As soon as she spotted him, she gestured toward a quieter booth near the back. Zeke followed, sliding into the seat across from her. But before they could speak, a soldier stumbled up to their table, already a few drinks deep. His face lit up as he spotted Zeke. "Whoa, my guardian angel!" the man bellowed, clapping Zeke on the shoulder with far too much force. "This guy saved my life!" Before Zeke could react, the soldier pulled him into a sloppy, one-armed hug. Abby smirked behind her glass, clearly entertained as the man made an uncoordinated attempt to plant a kiss on Zeke's cheek. Zeke groaned, pushing him off with a smirk. All right, you're drunk. Go sit down before you embarrass yourself more." The soldier laughed, giving Zeke's back a hearty pat before stumbling away, still mumbling something about heroism. Abby watched the exchange, her expression unreadable. "You get that a lot?" Zeke rolled his eyes. "I pulled him out of a tight spot once. Now he acts like I carried him down from the heavens." Abby studied him, swirling her drink slightly. "And you don't think of yourself that way?" Zeke exhaled. "I don't need anyone putting me on a pedestal. I did what I had to do. That's it." Abby tilted her head. "You saved someone's life, Zeke. That's not nothing." She set her drink down, lacing her fingers together. "Wouldn't you want someone to do the same for Snow?" Zeke's posture stiffened. There it was. She wasn't here for small talk. "You asked me here to tell me she doesn't belong on the battlefield." Abby exhaled, rubbing her thumb over the rim of her glass. She doesn't, Zeke. Her voice was firm. No hesitation, no hedging. I know you feel it too. You've seen the way she is. The way she feels everything. Zeke's jaw tightened. She's not built for this life, Abby continued, pressing the point. I don't care how strong she is emotionally, how much she wants to help. She should not be anywhere near a war zone. That's not my decision, Zeke said flatly. Abby shook her head. Maybe not, but you're part of it. She trusts you, she listens to you. Zeke looked away, taking a slow sip of his drink. Brass doesn't care about people, Zeke. They care about assets. They care about strategy. They'll use her for whatever they think she's worth, and when they're done... She exhaled, shaking her head. They won't be the ones dealing with the aftermath. You will. Zeke frowned. Abby leaned in slightly, her voice quieter. Look around. She gestured to the bar, to the soldiers drinking, laughing, trying to forget. These are trained fighters, hardened, experienced, battle-tested. And even they come here to drown it all out because no one leaves a battlefield the same. Her eyes locked onto his. What do you think it'll do to her? The words struck something deep. Zeke had spent his life in combat. He knew what war did to people. He'd seen men crack under the weight of it, seen good soldiers turn into ghosts of themselves. And Snow? She wasn't built for that. Not the way he was. Snow has survived a lot, Abby admitted, watching his expression carefully. More than most. But survival isn't the same as being ready for this life. You know that. I know that. So what are you asking me to do? Zeke asked, his voice quieter. Abby exhaled. Protect her. Zeke's frown deepened. From what? Abby held his gaze. From becoming someone she was never meant to be. Silence settled between them. The pub buzzed around them, laughter, music, the occasional shout of someone winning a bet. But at this table, the air felt still. You don't have to agree with me, Abby said finally, but at least think about it. Zeke exhaled, rubbing his jaw. Guess I don't have much of a choice, do I? Abby smiled faintly. Not really. He shook his head, pushing his drink aside. All right, we'll see. Abby pulled a cigarette from her pocket, lighting it with a practiced flick. The tip glowed as she took a slow, steady drag, exhaling smoke in a thin stream. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she masked it well. I got in this line of work to help soldiers recover psychologically, she murmured, staring past Zeke, past the room, past the present moment itself. The things I've seen. She trailed off, shaking her head as if trying to push back ghosts that refused to leave. For a long moment she just sat there, letting the silence settle between them. The pub buzzed with life around them. Laughter, shouting, the clinking of glasses. But it all felt distant, muffled. Then snapping back, she turned her gaze sharply to Zeke, locking eyes with him. Snow is not prepared for that. You have to see it too. Her voice was low, steady, but there was something raw in it, something pleading. Zeke exhaled through his nose, rubbing the bridge of his nose before meeting her gaze again. Yeah, he admitted, his voice quieter than before. I see it. And for the first time that night, there was no pushback, no debate, just understanding. The training grounds were a brutal place. Rows of recruits stood at attention, sweat and dust marking their uniforms, their bodies stiff from exhaustion. The air was thick with the scent of oil and metal, the hum of energy weapons from the live fire range pulsing in the background. This wasn't a classroom, it was a proving ground, and Snow had no business being here. Snow had been told she was only here to observe. This is a demonstration, the Admiral had said, his voice clipped and professional. An opportunity to understand the realities of war. But she knew better. This wasn't about education. This was about proving a point. Snow gripped the edge of the observation railing as she looked down at the training field. The recruits moved like a machine, precise, focused, conditioned to survive. They were given a brutal task, to extract an injured teammate while under live combat simulations. The enemy forces were automated drones and turret systems, their aim designed to disorient and overwhelm. Snow exhaled slowly, trying to ground herself. She felt the recruits' focus, their nerves, their readiness. And worse, she could feel their doubts about her. She doesn't belong here. Why is she even watching? Another test subject for the brass? Snow swallowed hard, her hands twitching at her sides. Then the gunfire started. The moment the first shot rang out, something inside her snapped. It wasn't real gunfire, but her body didn't care. The simulated combat erupted below. The recruits shouted commands, weapons flared, the harsh mechanical clicks of the turrets locking onto targets filled the air. Her breath hitched. The air felt too thin. The world tilted. And then she was falling. Not physically, her hands still clutched the railing, but her mind was spiraling. It was too much. The emotions from the recruits, the fear, the adrenaline, the burning determination to survive slammed into her like a tidal wave. It was louder than the gunfire, louder than the drill sergeant's commands, louder than her own heartbeat hammering in her ears. Her knees buckled. She gasped, sucking in a sharp, panicked breath. "Breathe, Snow!" A steady voice, a hand on her back. Abby. She was beside her now, solid and unmoving, gripping her shoulder just firm enough to anchor her. Snow clenched her eyes shut. "I can't," she choked out. "You can." Abby's voice was low, strong, certain. She crouched slightly, bringing herself to Snow's eye level. "Look at me, not them." Snow tried. But below, a recruit took a simulated hit, his vest lighting up red. His team left him behind. It was just a drill, just a simulation. But Snow felt his despair, and it nearly crushed her. Her body trembled violently, her breathing sharp and uneven. She dug her nails into her sleeves, trying to push it down, force it back, but it wasn't working. Abby saw it, and she had enough. She shot a glare first at the Admiral, then at Zeke. A warning, a challenge, a silent accusation. "This is what you wanted to prove?" Zeke's jaw tightened. He had expected Snow to struggle, but not like this. Not this visceral, breaking point kind of pain. The Admiral, on the other hand, remained motionless, expressionless, as if watching a predictable outcome unfold. That was the last straw. "We're leaving." Abby's voice was sharp as a blade. She didn't wait for permission. She looped an arm around Snow's waist, steadying her as she guided her off the platform. Snow barely registered the movement. The gunfire still rang in her ears, but Abby was leading her somewhere quieter. Somewhere safe, somewhere far from this cruel, pointless test. And Snow didn't look back. The training field continued as if nothing had happened. Recruits reset, drills restarted. But on the platform, the silence hung heavy. Abby and Snow were gone. Zeke exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. The Admiral's gaze remained on the field. "It was necessary," he said simply. Zeke's fingers curled into fists. "She's not a soldier," he muttered. The air was suffocating with tension. The briefing room was a stark contrast to the chaos of the training grounds, polished steel, dim lighting, and a massive hollow table displaying flickering data on the fractures destabilizing their world. Yet no amount of control in this room could contain the storm brewing inside it. Abby stood rigid, arms crossed, her fury barely restrained. Zeke leaned against the wall, watchful but tense. Cogwave stood near the hollow table, glowing circuitry pulsing faintly, calculating, waiting. And at the head of the table, the Admiral sat in perfect stillness, hands clasped, expression unreadable. "We don't have time for this," he said finally. "No." Abby's voice was sharp, her glare burning. "What we don't have time for is pretending Snow belongs anywhere near this." She slammed a hand against the table. "You saw what happened today. She nearly collapsed just watching a simulation. What do you think is going to happen when she's in a real battlefield, when there's no safety net, when there's no reset button?" The Admiral's expression didn't change. "You're thinking small, Lieutenant." His voice was calm, but it cut like a blade. "This is bigger than her, bigger than all of us. The fractures are spreading. If we don't close them, there won't be a world left to protect." Abby let out a harsh laugh, shaking her head. "And your solution is throwing her into the fire? You think she can handle that?" She gestured wildly. "She's not a soldier. She's barely even a recruit." The Admiral's gaze remained unwavering. "She is the only one who can do this." Silence. The words hung in the air, thick and undeniable. Zeke exhaled, arms crossed tight against his chest. "I get it," he muttered. "We're running out of time. We're running out of options. But tossing her into a war zone just to see if she survives, that's not a strategy. That's a damn gamble." The Admiral sighed. "She is not defenseless." That's when Cogwave finally spoke. "Incorrect." His voice was smooth, precise, devoid of doubt. He stepped forward, his illuminated eyes shifting between the Admiral and Abby. Snow is uniquely suited for combat. Abby turned on him, outraged. Are you kidding me? You saw what happened today, Cogwave. She shut down. She couldn't even breathe. She is untrained, Cogwave corrected, his tone as steady as ever. And yet, her unique physiology makes her the most effective potential soldier we have. He placed a hand on the hollow table. The data flickered, shifting to a detailed biometric scan of Snow. Her body does not sustain permanent injury. She does not suffer from internal hemorrhaging, concussive trauma, or fatal wounds. Her ability is, in essence, invulnerability. He turned to the Admiral. With proper training, Snow has the potential to be the strongest combatant on the field. Abby snapped. Are you even listening to yourself? Her voice rose, eyes blazing with fury. She's not a machine, Cogwave. She feels everything. She breaks in ways you can't measure, and you want to turn her into a weapon just because she can't die? Cogwave's glowing gaze didn't falter. I do not propose making her a weapon. I propose making her capable. You mean making her numb? Abby's breath shook with anger. Her hands clenched into fists before she forced them flat against the table. This is abuse. The room went still. Zeke's head snapped up. The Admiral raised an eyebrow, the first sign of reaction he had shown. Abby pressed on, her voice low but sharp. If I bring this to the health department, it will be categorized as willful endangerment, mental degradation under high-stress conditions, abuse of power. She leaned in, fire burning in her glare. I will make sure this entire operation is exposed for what it is, a calculated disregard for human life. The Admiral didn't blink. Then he sighed, rubbing his temple as if she had just wasted his time. Lieutenant, he said, boredom creeping into his voice, this is an operation that exists beyond the reach of civilian departments. They hold no authority here. His gaze sharpened, cutting straight through her. And you already know that. Abby's fists tightened. The Admiral stood, placing his hands behind his back. Let me make something very clear. His tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. This war does not care about what is fair. It does not care about who is ready. It only cares about who survives. His gaze swept across the room, settling on Zeke. You know this better than anyone, don't you, Sergeant? Zeke looked down. He didn't answer, because the Admiral was right. Abby turned to Zeke. Say something. Zeke exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. He didn't like it. But the truth? They were out of time, and whether Snow was ready or not, she wasn't being given a choice. Abby's breath was ragged, her fury still simmering. But she knew, looking at Zeke, looking at the Admiral, looking at Cogwave's unwavering logic, she had lost this fight. For now. She shook her head, stepping back from the table. I hope you're right, she said, voice quieter now but full of venom. Then, without another word, she turned and left. Zeke stared at the closed door for a long moment. Then, finally, he muttered under his breath, I hope you're wrong. The Admiral didn't reply, because they both knew. It didn't matter. The training grounds felt different this time. Not colder, not harsher, just waiting. Snow stood alone in the middle of the field, her heartbeat steady but loud. Above, the Admiral watched from the observation deck, hands clasped behind his back. His expression, as always, was unreadable. Zeke was at the edge of the field, silent, watching, waiting. And then the drill began. Snow wasn't wearing combat fatigues. She wasn't dressed for war. She stood in a long black dress, its fabric whispering against her legs as the wind stirred. It was made for movement, not defense, a contradiction in cloth. Long sleeves covered her arms, her fingers peeking out from the oversized cuffs, curled slightly, as if bracing for impact. The hem barely brushed the tops of her boots. It was not regulation, but she was a special case. She always had been. The simulated fracture event erupted across the field, twisting space into a jagged wound of blue static and distorted air. It pulsed like a living thing, tendrils of crackling energy warping the battlefield around it. The goal was simple: seal the fracture before it destabilized completely. But the moment Snow moved toward it, gunfire. The simulation had combat stressors this time. Rounds weren't real, but the impact knocked her back just the same. She hit the ground hard, breath leaving her in a sharp gasp. She had one job, but she couldn't do it. Not like this. Zeke watched from the sidelines, concern in his eyes. He had already known this was going to go badly, but seeing it firsthand was worse. Snow tried to move, tried to focus, but every time she reached out, she flinched when another shot cracked through the air, when another drone shifted in her periphery. She wasn't even touching the fracture. She was too overwhelmed to get near it. Finally, she dropped to one knee, panting, hands shaking and eyes unfocused. And then she muttered something, barely a whisper. "I can't feel what I can't see." Zeke frowned. He stepped forward, dropping to one knee beside her. "What?" he asked, voice low. Snow swallowed hard, her breath ragged. I keep second-guessing. I see too much. It throws everything off." She looked at the fracture, its erratic pulse warping the air. "I don't know how to reach it." Zeke stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he exhaled and pulled something from his pocket. A black cloth. Snow blinked at it. Her lips parted slightly. "You want me to fight shadows in the dark?" Zeke's expression remained unreadable. "No." He met her gaze, steady. "I want you to trust the light that's already there." She hesitated, looked at the fracture, looked at the chaos around them. Then slowly, she took the cloth. Her fingers trembled as she tied it around her eyes, the world around her fading to black. She inhaled, and then everything changed. She couldn't see the field anymore, couldn't see the Admiral, couldn't see Zeke kneeling beside her. But she could feel. The fracture wasn't a wound on the world. It was a pulse, a rhythm. And when she stopped trying to chase it with her eyes, she finally understood it. Snow stepped forward, slowly at first, then with purpose. She didn't dodge the bullets whizzing past her. She didn't even flinch. She didn't need to. She wasn't relying on sight anymore. She felt where she needed to be. Her hands reached out, and she touched the fracture. The static energy coiled around her like a living thing. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't violent. It was wounded. Snow breathed. Her hands pulsed with warmth. Not magic, not power, but something else. Understanding. The energy recognized her touch. She didn't need to fix it. She just needed to guide it back together. And slowly the fracture stabilized. The jagged tendrils of energy pulled inward, the wound in space stitching itself closed. And then it was gone. The field went silent. No one spoke. The Admiral's gaze was unreadable. Zeke, still kneeling beside her, exhaled slowly. "You did it." Snow lifted her hands, pulling the blindfold away. The battlefield came back into view. She blinked, lightheaded, breath shaky. The black dress settled softly around her as she stood, the only thing untouched in the dirt-stained war zone. For the first time since stepping foot on this base, she felt something other than fear. For the first time, she knew what she was meant to do. Next chapter. Zeke knocked twice before letting himself into Cogwave's apartment on base. The place was dimly lit, a single lamp casting a soft glow over the scattered books on the floor. Cogwave sat cross-legged among them, flipping through pages with a slow, deliberate motion. His head tilted slightly to the side, as if listening to something unseen, as if asking silent questions only he could hear the answers to. Zeke leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You like doing this?" he asked. Cogwave didn't look up immediately, his fingers trailing over the aged paper. "Books remember things in ways we don't," he murmured. "Patterns, thoughts, pieces of time caught between ink and paper." Zeke sighed, shaking his head. "Well, take a mental snapshot, 'cause we have that meeting with the big wigs. Apparently, something important is going down." Cogwave finally lifted his gaze, his expression unreadable. "Everything is important, depending on how you look at it." Zeke smirked. "Yeah, well, this one involves people who outrank both of us, and they actually expect us to show up. Let's go." Cogwave hesitated for a moment before gently closing the book in front of him. He traced its cover once, as if sealing away whatever knowledge he'd pulled from it, then rose to his feet in one smooth motion. "Lead the way," he said, his voice quiet but steady. Zeke pushed the door open wider. "Just don't start talking about books in the middle of the meeting. Pretty sure Brass doesn't care about patterns of thought in ink." Cogwave's lips twitched into something that might have been amusement. "That would depend on what kind of ink." Zeke groaned. "This is going to be a long meeting." The war room was dimly lit. the glow of holographic displays casting sharp blue shadows across the table. Trenholm stood at the head, arms crossed, his expression carved from stone as the latest intelligence scrolled across the screen. The disturbance was centered around the lab of Dr. Thornwell. Zeke leaned forward, scanning the reports. "This is bigger than we thought. Thornwell vanishes without a trace, and now his lab is locked down? That's no coincidence." Across the table, Colonel Vance Aldrich of the Dominion Security Council leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "That's because it falls under our jurisdiction, not yours. Your people have no clearance." Trenholm's gaze didn't waver. "You expect me to stand back while you fumble this? My people are the best chance you have at figuring out what's going on." The colonel scoffed. "Your people are a liability. You want in, file the proper requests. Until then, stay out of our way." Tension crackled like an unlit fuse. Zeke glanced at Cogwave, who stood silently at the back of the room, absorbing everything. He tilted his head slightly, a small indication that he was already processing the underlying conflict beyond just the words being spoken. "This isn't just about jurisdiction," Zeke muttered under his breath. "This is a power struggle." Trenholm exhaled sharply. "We don't have time for politics. Thornwell's disappearance alone should have both of our sides concerned. We need boots inside that lab before this spirals any further." "And I need assurances your people won't make it worse," the colonel countered. "You know how delicate Thornwell's work is. A single misstep and we're looking at a disaster." "We may already be looking at one," Trenholm shot back. "And if you keep stonewalling us, you're going to have a lot more than jurisdiction to worry about." The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of authority clashing against necessity. Finally, Aldrich exhaled, rubbing his temples. "I'll take it up the chain, but for now, your people stay out. That's final." Trenholm clenched his jaw, but Zeke could tell he wasn't about to back down. Something was brewing, and if the two sides didn't find common ground soon, this conflict wouldn't just be about jurisdiction, it would be about control. The war room felt different the moment Aldrich and his officers left. The door sealed shut with a mechanical hiss, locking out their presence but not their influence. The tension didn't leave with them. If anything, it grew sharper, more focused. Only the Admiral, Zeke, Cogwave, and a handful of trusted advisors remained, gathered around the illuminated table. The glow of the holomap cast shifting shadows across their faces, displaying battle lines, weak points, and fracture zones. And yet none of them were looking at it anymore. The Admiral leaned forward, steepling his fingers. His voice was even, but there was something measured beneath it. "We may not be able to enter," he said, pausing just long enough for the weight of his words to settle. "But we have an ace up our sleeve." Zeke raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." With a nod, the Admiral gestured to one of his aides. The man tapped a control panel and the battle map flickered, dissolving into a dossier file. A name flashed into view: Silas March. Scattered intel reports, surveillance images blurry and grainy, capturing glimpses of a figure moving through dimly lit corridors. The Admiral tapped the table. "Thornwell's assistant," Zeke frowned. "You think he'll cooperate?" "Not yet," the Admiral admitted. "But he might if we get to him first." A silence stretched between them before the Admiral spoke again. His voice dropped slightly, as if testing the words. "The scout I told you about earlier." Zeke leaned forward slightly, his brow furrowing. "A scout?" he repeated. "And who exactly was sent to retrieve him?" The Admiral exhaled, leaning back in his chair. A smile appeared on his face. Across the table, Cogwave, silent until now, tilted his head slightly. His glowing circuitry pulsed in slow, thoughtful rhythms. "Scout?" The Admiral hesitated. It wasn't uncertainty, not exactly, but something close. "She is a guest of this military," he finally said. "Not an official soldier, not even of this world, as a matter of fact." A beat of silence followed. Zeke exchanged a glance with Cogwave. "All right," he said slowly. "And you trust her?" The Admiral sighed, rubbing his temples. A rare crack in his composure. "I just hope she's successful," he admitted. His voice wasn't uncertain, just tired. His eyes flicked to the dossier again, to the fragmented intelligence they had on Silas March. "Because if she's not, we may not get another chance." Next chapter. Silas didn't like this. He hadn't liked it for weeks, not since Thornwell's disappearance. Something was gnawing at the back of his mind. an unease that refused to settle. It wasn't just paranoia. It was something real, something wrong. He just didn't know what. He sat across from his older brother, Marcus, in the cluttered warmth of a family home that felt so distant from the life he lived. The wooden table between them was old, worn from years of meals, laughter, and heated debates. Around them, Marcus's children weaved in and out of the room, their laughter a stark contrast to the weight in Silas's chest. Marcus leaned back in his chair, taking a slow sip from his mug before leveling his gaze at Silas. You know, Silas, maybe a good vacation would do you good. All this stress, all the strangeness going on in the world, it's not good for the mind. Silas exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. I don't need a vacation, Marcus. I need answers. His brother scoffed, setting his mug down with a solid thunk. Answers right, because sitting around brooding is going to bring those. His voice carried that same blunt, slightly condescending tone it always had, the one that grated on Silas's nerves just enough to be irritating. Silas leaned forward, lowering his voice. Something happened to Thornwell. He didn't just disappear, something took him. And if I sit around pretending everything's fine, I might be next. Marcus sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. Look, I get it. You worked with the guy, you trusted him, and now he's gone. But you need to let this go before it eats you alive. Be here. Look at them. He gestured toward his kids, now chasing each other around the kitchen island. There's more to life than whatever twisted experiments Thornwell was involved in. Silas opened his mouth to argue, but a noise outside stopped him cold. A car engine. No. Too quiet. Something hovering. Something unnatural. His stomach twisted. Someone was here. Marcus noticed the change in his expression. Silas, he asked, but Silas was already rising from his chair, heart pounding. Outside, the shadows shifted. Silas stared out the window, his muscles still tense, his breath shallow. But the longer he listened, the less threatening the sound became. A soft rustling outside, then the low, almost mechanical hoot of an owl. Marcus, watching him from the table, shook his head. Geez, Silas, you look like you've seen a ghost. Silas didn't answer. His gut told him there was something more to that sound, but logic reminded him how ridiculous that sounded. He wasn't a child anymore, jumping at shadows. Marcus sighed, taking another sip of his drink before resting his forearms on the table. You know, we had another family member who started seeing things that weren't there. Silas turned, narrowing his eyes. What? Marcus leaned back slightly like he was easing into dangerous territory. Uncle Bob. You remember him, right? Always convinced people were following him, seeing things out of the corners of his eyes, hearing voices in the wind. Mom used to say it started small. Paranoia first, then the real breakdowns, the asylum visits. I don't have to remind you how that ended. Silas's fingers curled into a fist on the table. That's different. Marcus gave a slow shrug. Maybe, maybe not. I'm just saying. He tapped the side of his head. You should check in with yourself before you go down the same path. Silas exhaled sharply, shaking his head. This isn't like that. This is real. Marcus raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Real? You're jumping at an owl, man. You've been acting off for weeks. Thornwell disappears and suddenly everything's a conspiracy. Maybe you just need to step back before you drive yourself into a hole you can't climb out of. Silas clenched his jaw, the words sinking deeper than he wanted them to. Was he losing it? Was the pressure finally getting to him? Another rustle outside. The owl hooted again. Normal. Just an owl. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. Maybe I just need some sleep, he muttered, rubbing his temples. Marcus nodded. Now that's the smartest thing you've said all night. But Silas wasn't sure he'd get any rest at all. Silas leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as Marcus took another sip of his drink, looking far too pleased with himself. The owl outside had gone quiet, and for a moment the house settled into a peaceful hum. But before Silas could even start to process Marcus's words, the sound of small, rapid footsteps filled the room. Uncle Silas! Uncle Silas! The sudden swarm of children descended on him like a pack of restless spirits, their faces full of expectation. Marcus sighed but didn't intervene. "They've been waiting for you all night, you know." Silas forced a smile. The weight of paranoia momentarily pushed aside as his nieces and nephews climbed up onto his lap, the couch, and whatever other surfaces they could find. He had always been the fun uncle, the one who didn't mind getting caught up in their endless curiosity. "Tell us a story," one of the younger ones demanded, tugging on his sleeve. Silas exhaled, shaking his head. "A story? You guys don't want a bedtime story from me?" "Yes, we do," another one whined. "Not a boring one, though." "Yeah, one of your good ones, the ones with monsters and stuff." Silas chuckled, glancing at Marcus, who just rolled his eyes and leaned back. All right, Silas said, holding up his hands in surrender. "But if I tell you a story, you all have to promise me something." "What?" they all chorused at once. "You have to go to bed afterward, no stalling, no running around the house like lunatics. Deal?" A few groaned, but they all eventually nodded, settling in with eager eyes. Silas rubbed his chin, thinking. He could weave a tale easily enough. He'd done it countless times before. But tonight, with the eerie stillness outside, the nagging weight of Thornwell's disappearance, and Marcus's unsettling remarks, his mind drifted somewhere darker. "All right," he began, his voice dropping into that perfect storyteller's rhythm. "Once, a long time ago, there was a traveler who wandered into a town where everyone had disappeared. No signs of struggle, no messages left behind, just houses with doors wide open, food left on plates, beds still warm." A hush fell over the kids, their eyes wide, their little hands gripping their blankets. Marcus frowned from across the table. "You sure this is a bedtime story?" Silas ignored him, his voice taking on that familiar, almost hypnotic cadence. "But there was one thing left behind," he continued, "a single owl, sitting on the highest rooftop, watching, waiting." One of the younger nephews shivered. "Like the one outside?" Silas hesitated for only a fraction of a second before grinning. "Maybe, but this wasn't any normal owl. See, the traveler noticed something strange. Every time he turned his back, the owl got closer." A few of the kids gasped, and one of them practically buried themselves in their sibling's lap. Marcus groaned. "Come on, man. They'll never sleep now." Silas just smirked. Well, maybe they should have asked for a boring story. The laughter that followed was enough to make him forget, just for a little while, about the gnawing feeling in the back of his mind. But as he tucked his nieces and nephews into their beds, he couldn't shake the sensation that something was watching. And it wasn't the owl. The house was quieter now, the chaos of bedtime winding down, leaving only the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional creak of settling wood. As he stepped back into the hallway, rolling his shoulders to ease the tension there, he noticed someone standing near the entrance to the living room. Marcus's wife, Evelyn, leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching him with a quiet curiosity. She had been there a while, observing. "You're good with them," she said softly. "They love their Uncle Silas." Silas gave a small shrug, rubbing the back of his neck. "They're easy to please. Just need a little imagination." Evelyn smiled, but there was something thoughtful in her gaze, something measuring. She hesitated for a moment, then tilted her head. "So, when are you going to start a family of your own?" Silas blinked, caught off guard. "That's a loaded question." Evelyn chuckled, stepping forward slightly. "It's an honest one. You're great with kids. You'd be a good dad." Silas exhaled, glancing toward the dimly lit hallway. "I don't know. Never really thought about it." Evelyn arched an eyebrow. "That's a lie." Silas smirked, but there wasn't much humor in it. "Maybe, but now's not the time. Got too much going on." She studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Fair enough. Just don't wait too long. Life has a way of passing by when you're too busy chasing ghosts." Silas didn't answer. He just stood there, feeling the weight of her words settle over him like a slow-moving storm. The night air was crisp as Silas stepped onto the porch, his breath visible in the dim glow of the streetlights. His bag hung over his shoulder, heavier than it should have been, weighed down by thoughts rather than belongings. Evelyn followed him out, arms crossed against the chill. She didn't say anything at first, just stood beside him, letting the silence stretch between them. Then, with a soft sigh, she stepped forward and pulled him into a warm hug. "Take care of yourself, Silas," she murmured, "and don't be a stranger." Silas returned the hug. "Yeah, you too." As he stepped back, Marcus leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "Try not to get lost in your own head, little brother," he said with a smirk, tapping his temple with 2 fingers. Silas chuckled, shaking his head. Yeah, no promises." Marcus waved him off, Evelyn giving him one last knowing look before he made his way down the porch steps. The road stretched ahead, dark but familiar, leading him back to a life that felt just a little less certain than before. As he drove off, the house behind him grew smaller in the rearview mirror, but the weight of the conversation, of the night itself, stayed with him. Silas pushed open the glass door to the small tea shop, a soft chime announcing his arrival. The scent of steeped herbs and honey filled the air, a stark contrast to the tension that had been sitting in his chest since last night. He wasn't sure why he chose this place, maybe because it was the kind of spot that reminded him of his grandma's home. Calm, grounded, the opposite of the uncertainty pressing in around him. Eliza was already there, seated near the window. Sunlight filtered in, catching in the soft curls of steam rising from her cup. She was wearing a simple blouse, sleeves pushed up, a quiet kind of elegance that made her seem at ease, even in a world that was anything but. She looked up as he approached, tilting her head slightly. "You look like someone who spent the night thinking too much." Silas smirked as he slid into the chair across from her. "That obvious?" she hummed, taking a slow sip of her tea before setting the cup down. "You have that look. The one people get when they're carrying something they haven't figured out how to put down yet." He leaned back, exhaling. "Had dinner with my brother and his family." Eliza nodded, waiting. She was patient like that. "Marcus is an ass, but the kids—" He shook his head, a small smile forming. "They're great. They practically shouted at me for stories." Eliza smirked. "And did you tell them a good one?" "The best, obviously." A brief, comfortable silence settled between them as he reached for his own cup. He wasn't much of a tea person, but something about the setting made coffee feel out of place. He took a sip, the warmth settling in his chest. Finally, he spoke again. "What about you?" Eliza arched a brow. "What about me?" "Family," he said, setting his cup down. "What does that look like to you?" Something flickered in her expression, too quick for him to place. She glanced toward the window, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of her cup. "I don't know," she admitted. "I never had one. Not in the way you mean." Silas frowned. "No siblings?" She shook her head. "Not really." He studied her, picking apart the carefully measured words, the way she didn't elaborate. "Not really," he repeated. Eliza gave a small, almost amused huff. "You ask a lot of questions." Silas smirked. "That's what happens when you hang out with kids. They rub off on you." She lifted her cup, eyes flicking back to his. "And here I thought you just couldn't help yourself." He chuckled, but something about the way she held herself told him not to push. At least, not yet. Outside, the world moved on, people walking past, the hum of distant traffic, the faint chatter of other patrons. But inside, in this quiet little shop, it felt like something unspoken was settling between them. Something he wasn't quite ready to put into words. Next chapter. The base pub was its usual blend of noise, sweat, and controlled chaos. The air smelled of spilled drinks and heated metal, and the low hum of old speakers competed with the shouts and laughter of off-duty soldiers looking to unwind. In the far corner, 2 stocky female recruits were throwing hands, their boots scuffing the floor as they grappled, swinging in tight, practiced arcs. A small crowd had gathered, placing bets and shouting encouragement. The barkeep barely looked up. Just another night. Zeke sat in the corner booth, leaning back with his arm resting against the worn leather seat. Across from him, Abby sipped her drink, fingers idly tapping against the glass as she watched the brawl with mild amusement. She was fit, athletic, the kind of person who carried herself like she'd been through hell, but still had the energy to take on whatever came next. Dishwater blonde hair, brown eyes that missed nothing. She wasn't flashy, wasn't trying to impress just someone who had been around the block enough times to know bullshit when she saw it. Zeke smirked, Let me guess, you're betting on the one in red. Abby huffed a short laugh. Nah, the one in gray's got better footwork. The fight continued in the background, but Abby turned back to him, expression shifting slightly. I called you here because I wanted to say thanks. Zeke raised a brow, taking a sip of his drink. For what? She rolled her eyes. For Snow, finding a way to keep her together out there. She shook her head, exhaling. I still think it's ridiculous, but if it works, it works. Zeke nodded, stretching his legs out under the table. Yeah, wasn't exactly by the book, but nothing about her situation is. Before Abby could respond, a group of recruits approached, already half buzzed from their drinks. Oh shit, we hear you're the one who downed Red Eyes. You gotta tell us details, man. Another one spoke up, eyes wide with excitement. Yeah, tell us everything. A more sensible cadet hesitated, glancing at Abby. But, if you want to spend quality time with your girlfriend first. He stammered awkwardly, already realizing his mistake. Zeke turned his head. Deadpan. Later, guys. Come on now. Oops, sorry, dude. They backed off, leaving Zeke and Abby to their conversation. She chuckled, shaking her head. You get that a lot? He shrugged. Comes with the territory. They settled back into small talk, the pub's noise fading into the background. Eventually, Abby reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out her communicator, and slid it across the table. A photo of 3 kids stared back at him. 2 boys, 1 girl, all under 10. These are mine, she said, voice softer than before. Divorce number 3, though. Job stress. It wears people down. Zeke looked at the image, then at her. Yeah, I know how that goes. She met his gaze, curious but not pressing. For the first time in a while, Zeke opened up just a little, talked about his own divorce. Nothing too deep, just enough to acknowledge the wreckage people like them carried. By the time bar time was closing in, Abby finished her drink, leaned forward slightly, and slid a folded scrap of paper across the table. Night doesn't have to be over. A small smirk. My place, if you feel like talking more. She stood up, gave him a last knowing smile, and walked out. Zeke exhaled, staring at the folded paper for a moment before sliding it into his pocket. As he got up, the group of recruits from earlier called out. Red Eyes! Zeke paused. A decision. Then he grinned, shaking his head as he walked over, dropping into a seat. Red Eyes? He scoffed, grabbing someone's half-empty glass. He wasn't shit. The group howled, pounding the table, their laughter echoing across the room. Then, from the nearby wall, Cogwave's head emerged, the smooth metal of his face blending in just enough that no one had noticed him before. He tilted his head slightly, glowing blue eyes scanning the group. Affirmative. Red Eyes wasn't shit. The entire table erupted, loud hooting, howls of laughter, fists slamming on wood. Even Zeke had to chuckle, shaking his head as he clinked his stolen drink against the nearest one. For now, he wasn't thinking about what came next. For now, he was just here. Next chapter. The office was bathed in the golden glow of artificial lighting, casting long shadows across the polished surface of the desk. The air smelled of expensive leather and faint traces of cologne, subtle, controlled, like everything about the man sitting behind the desk. Mr. Halstead. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, listening in silence as Colonel Vance Aldrich delivered his report. New information from the Dorian Trenholm camp. Halstead exhaled sharply, his fingers tapping against the armrest. Trenholm again. Aldrich nodded, his expression impassive. His sources have pinpointed Silas March and are sending out to retrieve him. Halstead closed his eyes for a moment, thinking, calculating. He didn't need long. Unfortunate. He opened them again, his gaze cold, distant. He has talent as a seeker. Aldrich stood still, waiting. Halstead closed the notebook in front of him, his decision already made. Tell the angel to kill him immediately. No hesitation, no elaboration. Just another order, another loose end to be cut. Aldrich gave a curt nod. Understood. And with that, he turned and walked out, leaving Halstead alone in the dimly lit office, the weight of unseen decisions pressing against the silence. Next chapter. The pub was dark, dank and cloying with the scent of old wood, spilled liquor, and sweat. It was the kind of place where the walls absorbed secrets, where time slowed just enough for people to forget who they were outside its doors. Eliza and Silas sat at a small, wobbly table near the back, away from the louder, more boisterous patrons who were too deep into their drinks to care about anything beyond the next round. A low amber light flickered above them, barely illuminating the uneven grains in the wood beneath their hands. This place, the same one they had met in weeks ago. Back then it had felt different. Warmer, lighter. Now something about the air had changed. Or maybe Silas had changed. Eliza was already a few drinks in, but she wasn't drunk. She was controlled, deliberate. Silas, however, was beginning to loosen up. He leaned back in his chair, fingers tracing the rim of his glass, half smirking as they exchanged light conversation. The kind that came easy when you had too much in your system and didn't want to think too hard. But something was off. It wasn't the bar, the noise, or even the vague sense of something pressing down on him, something he couldn't name. It was Eliza. She was staring at him. Not watching, staring like she was waiting for something. A look that wasn't curiosity, wasn't admiration. It was quizzical, mixed with something else. A 1,000-yard stare wrapped inside a smirk. Silas exhaled, rubbing his temple before looking back at her. You seem a little off tonight, Eliza." She didn't react at first. Just held his gaze with that same smirky expression, as if she was studying something beyond him, something just outside of his awareness. Then she smiled. Not her usual smirk, something else, something wrong. Eliza tilted her head slightly, her smirk never quite fading, but not quite reaching her eyes either. The dim light caught in the curve of her glass as she rolled it between her fingers, the liquid inside barely disturbed, as if she had been holding it for too long without drinking. Silas shifted in his seat, trying to shake off the unease creeping into his spine. "Eliza." She blinked slowly, as if waking from a daydream. "Hmm?" He narrowed his eyes. "You're staring at me like I've got two heads." She chuckled, finally taking a sip. "You'd look awful with two heads." Silas exhaled through his nose, drumming his fingers against the table. "All right, so what's up?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached across the table, sliding 2 fingers toward his drink, then stopping just short of touching it. Her nails tapped once, twice. Then she spoke. "I was just thinking about choices." Silas raised an eyebrow. "What about them?" Eliza leaned in slightly, voice soft, almost mockingly conspiratorial. "How many choices do you think you've actually made?" Silas frowned. "The hell kind of question is that?" Eliza just smiled again, but there was something sharp behind it now. "I mean, do you really think you've been steering your own ship all this time?" Silas rolled his shoulders, feeling the warmth of alcohol settling in, making him just hazy enough to entertain this strange game. "That's what free will is, isn't it?" he countered. "Making your own damn choices?" Eliza exhaled through her nose, shaking her head slowly, as if he had just said something unbearably naive. "See, I don't think that's true." She let the words settle before continuing, tapping his glass again. "I think most people are just reacting, thinking they're making decisions when really." She tapped his glass one last time, letting the sound linger. "They're just following the current." Silas's frown deepened. "All right, philosopher, where are you going with this?" Eliza swirled her drink, watching the liquid move as if it held the answer. "Just wondering if you've ever really thought about it." Silas huffed. "Yeah, well, I'm thinking about it now, and I still think you're full of shit." She laughed, but there was something behind it, something too entertaining, too knowing. Then she lifted her drink, holding it out slightly. "Cheers, then, to free will." Silas stared at her for a moment, something cold stirring in his gut despite the warmth of the room. Still, he clinked his glass against hers, took a drink, and wondered, for the first time in a long time, if he was in control of anything at all. The pub had been steeped in the usual murky glow, candlelight flickering against stained walls, the low amber haze of liquor, and the quiet hum of too many people speaking in voices meant not to be heard. Then, without warning, a burst of blue. It wasn't the flicker of a neon sign, nor the cold, sterile glow of military tech. It was something else, something alive. The entire room froze. Patrons flinched, shielding their eyes as chairs scraped across the floor. Drinks sloshed, curses slipped from half-open mouths, and a few men stumbled back, their bodies instinctively recoiling from the unnatural radiance flooding the space. Behind the barkeep squinted against the light, a sharp string of profanity barely audible over the sudden hush. And at the center of it, a figure emerged. She stepped forward, her silhouette outlined in the glow, her features blurred by the sheer force of it. Unshaken, steady, walking through the stunned silence as if nothing else existed. She moved through the room like an inevitability, past the wide-eyed patrons, their hands still raised against the brilliance, past the drunken men, blinking sluggishly as if their bodies couldn't decide if they were still intoxicated or if this was something deeper, something woven into their nerves, past the threshold of something that could not be ignored, straight to Silas March. He sat rigid, his fingers still curled around his glass. The warmth of the liquor had faded, leaving only the cold press of glass against his palm. His pulse quickened, a reaction without understanding. Instinct before logic. Across from him, Eliza remained still. Too still, but he saw it. The shift in her posture, the almost imperceptible twitch of her fingers where they rested against her own glass. She was reading the situation, calculating, waiting. And then, the woman stopped at their table. The glow didn't fade, didn't settle. It remained a living thing, pulsing faintly, casting strange, shifting reflections across the liquor bottles, making the damp wood of the table gleam, as though it had been touched by something not meant for this world. Silas's breath caught in his throat. She looked at him, directly, completely. Not with anger, not with mercy, just certainty. Silas March. Her voice wasn't raised, but it didn't need to be. The sound of it cut through the tension, slicing it clean, as if her words carried a weight that had already been set in motion long before she arrived. Then, I need you to come with me. For the first time since she had walked into Silas's life, Eliza looked surprised. Not amused, not smug, not in control. Genuine surprise. The blue glow still pulsed around the woman standing before them, casting shifting shadows across the table, making the liquor in their glasses shimmer like molten sapphire. The patrons of the club were still recovering, blinking, shielding their eyes, murmuring questions no one dared to say too loudly. But Eliza hadn't moved. Her fingers still rested on her glass, but now she wasn't drinking. Silas's mind was still catching up, alcohol and adrenaline warring for dominance in his bloodstream. But Eliza? She understood immediately. She had made a mistake. She was supposed to kill him immediately. No time for games, no time for drinks, no time for the mock philosophy she had spent the night feeding him. But she had played with her food first. And now someone else was here. Eliza's eyes flicked from the woman to Silas and back again. Then, slowly, she leaned back in her chair, draping one arm over the backrest in mock relaxation. Sorry, honey. He's with me, private party. Her smirk crept back into place, but this time it was covering something else, something she wasn't used to feeling. Panic. Her gaze flicked up and down, taking in the woman before her. Too clean, too bright. A walking beacon in a place like this? That meant she was either incredibly stupid or incredibly dangerous. Either way, Eliza wasn't impressed. She lifted her glass and gestured lazily toward the door. By your flashy lights, I take it you're lost. A beat, then a slow, razor-edged smirk. You're looking for the place down the street, sweetheart. Silas blinked. Even in his current state, he knew what she meant. The pinball hall, a place for those who didn't quite fit within the expectations of the city. It wasn't just a bar. It was a statement. A place where people dressed, moved, and lived outside the lines society had drawn. Some called it expression. Others called it defiance. Either way, Eliza meant it as an insult. Silas, still holding his drink, finally spoke. Eliza? His voice was quieter than it should have been, like something about this was finally sobering him up. But Eliza didn't look at him. She was locked in on the woman who had just walked through the storm and shattered the plan. Sky stood unshaken, as if the unnatural glow surrounding her was as much a part of her as her own skin. Her presence alone rearranged the gravity of the room. When she finally spoke, her voice was even, calm, a force that didn't need to be raised to be heard. Recon Scout Sky Vance, Special Reconnaissance Unit, operating under shared orders from the Steam Corps Division. I am here to bring you in, sir." The words landed sharp and deliberate. Silas barely reacted. He was still catching up, still feeling the weight of the night pressing down on him. But across from him, Eliza leaned forward, elbow resting against the table, fingers tracing lazy circles against the side of her glass. The military. The thought cut clean through the fog, and for just a breath, so brief it might have been imagined, her hand slowed. The circling stopped, then resumed. It wasn't much. A pause between motions. A blink held a moment too long. She watched the scout, said nothing. Sky remained steady, eyes locked on Silas, posture straight as a rail, unmoved. Only after her message was fully delivered did she turn to Eliza, eyes sweeping her up and down without hesitation. Not hostile, not amused. "If you are his wife," Sky said smoothly, "I assure you he will be in safe hands, ma'am." The glow around her continued its steady pulse. The soft hum of energy filled the space, persistent as breath, as if the room itself refused to exhale. Eliza didn't move right away, didn't speak. Then, casual, measured, she leaned back, one arm draping across the back of her chair. The smile came slow, smooth, untouched. "That's cute, dear," she murmured, head tilting just slightly. "Calling me ma'am." But the fingers tapping against her glass had stopped again. Quiet now. Still. And for the first time tonight, Silas had no idea which way this was about to go. Sky remained where she stood, expression unchanged, voice steady as steel. "And Admiral Dorian Trenholm sent me." The name landed between them like a weight. Solid, unshakable. Eliza watched her carefully. No hesitation, no flicker of deception. If this was a bluff, it was a damn good one. Sky reached into the inner pocket of her long coat, retrieving a folded document. She placed it on the table between them, tapping it lightly. One motion, direct, without force. "I have proper paperwork and a number for you to call if need be." The glow surrounding her still pulsed, steady, like the rhythm of a slow heartbeat. Controlled, persistent. Silas, who had been quiet until now, swallowed. His name was on the orders, not Eliza's. But then Sky did something unexpected. She tilted her head ever so slightly, meeting Eliza's gaze without a trace of condescension. "Orders were for Mr. March," she continued smoothly. "But I don't see a problem with you accompanying him, ma'am. If that would help your concern?" She said it without sarcasm, without mockery. An invitation. Eliza exhaled through her nose, slow and thoughtful. The light cast sharp contrasts over her face, but her expression remained smooth, unreadable. Silas could almost hear the gears turning in her mind. Eliza picked up the paper, eyes flicking over the details. She wasn't skimming. She was memorizing. The tension didn't break. It simply changed. Now it wasn't about whether Sky was real. She was. Now it was about what to do with that information. Eliza finally set the document down, tapping her fingers once against it. Then she smiled. Slow, sharp, measured. Yes, that would help my concern. This night wasn't over. Not even close. The air outside the pub was thick with the smell of damp pavement and burning oil. The distant hum of machinery filled the space between voices, the ever-present heartbeat of the city's industrial sprawl. Sky led the way, her glow casting faint reflections on the rain-slicked ground, her posture unshaken, unreadable. Eliza walked beside Silas, her movements casual, too casual. Silas could still feel the tension crackling in the air between them. Nobody spoke. Not yet. The steam chopper was parked just ahead, resting on a reinforced landing pad, a sleek, military-grade machine with steaming exhaust valves hissing like a beast ready to move. Its engines thrummed low, waiting, its polished steel glinting in the distant glow of neon city lights. They were nearly there. Then, halt! The command was sharp, cutting through the night like a blade. From the shadows of the alleyway ahead, a group of soldiers stepped into view. Their uniforms bore no standard insignia, only the sharp, angular emblem of the Dominion Security Council. Not Trenholm's people. Then, from behind the line, a young soldier rushed forward. Too young, too nervous, and obviously out of his league. His boots splashed against the damp pavement as he skidded to a stop, his face pale beneath his helmet. A recruit, maybe. Someone sent ahead to test the waters before his superiors got involved. He stiffened, then snapped into an awkward salute. "Sorry, ma'am," he stammered, looking at Sky, his voice cracking slightly. "But we have orders to keep Mr. March here." Sky didn't react, didn't acknowledge the slip in his tone, didn't even blink. The soldier shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward Silas, then back to Sky. His fingers fumbled with the device strapped to his wrist, a military-grade communicator. I'll get my commanding officer, he said quickly, his fingers shaking slightly as he pressed a sequence of buttons, struggling to make the connection. Silas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This kid had no idea what he had just walked into. Eliza let out a slow, exaggerated sigh. She turned slightly, arms crossing over her chest, watching him fumble with his communicator like it was the most pitiful thing she had ever seen. The young soldier was still fumbling with his communicator, his hands shaking just enough to be noticeable. The device let out a few sharp beeps, a failed connection, then another. Then a heavy set of boots thundered across the pavement. A burly man in a half-buttoned uniform came rushing up, still chewing on something, a napkin hanging loosely from his chin. He had the look of a man who had been pulled away from a hot meal against his will. And worse, one who was now staring down a situation he hadn't been properly briefed on. Oh, shit. He stopped in front of them, breathing heavily, eyes flicking between Sky and the Dominion soldiers. Then, with visible reluctance, he took the papers from Sky's hand. His eyes scanned the documents, his brows furrowing as he read the name. Admiral Dorian Trenholm. Silas watched as the man's expression tightened, jaw shifting, muscles in his face twitching just slightly. He wasn't confused. He was conflicted. Finally, he let out a gruff sigh, shifting his weight. He cleared his throat. We were told to not recognize his authority. Silas felt his pulse spike. Sky's glow pulsed harder for a fraction of a second, her presence growing just slightly heavier. And then, for the first time since she had stepped into the bar, she sounded annoyed. Wait, I thought you were on the same side. Her words weren't a question. They weren't angry. They were stated as an undeniable fact, like she was simply trying to process the sheer idiocy of what was happening. The burly officer rubbed the back of his neck, still holding the documents like they were something dangerous. His eyes flicked to Silas, then to Eliza, then back to Sky. And then for a moment, just a brief, fleeting second, he looked like a man questioning every single career decision that had led him to this exact moment. Because this was above his damn pay grade. The burly officer's fingers fumbled with his communicator, his thick hands awkwardly pressing the buttons as he tried to establish a stable connection. His napkin was still hanging from his chin, forgotten in the weight of the moment. Static crackled. Then a voice on the other end. Status report. The officer glanced up at the group standing before him, Sky's blue glow still humming around her, Eliza watching him like a cat deciding whether or not to play with a dying mouse, and Silas, looking like he wished he was anywhere else. He turned slightly, lowering his voice as if it would make a damn difference. Listen, we got a problem. Silence. Then, what kind of problem? The burly officer inhaled through his nose, removing the napkin still dangling from his neck before he huffed out a nervous chuckle. So what are we going to do, shoot them? The communicator crackled again. Excuse me? He shifted his weight, suddenly very aware of how stupid this was getting. I'm not doing that shit, he muttered, shaking his head. Then, sighing, hey, then why don't you guys come down here and stop them? A beat of silence on the other end. Then muffled arguing, not just one voice, multiple. Eliza let out a slow exhale, shaking her head. Oh, this is fantastic. Sky remained unshaken. But Silas? Silas was watching, and for the first time he realized something. These weren't just military rivals. They weren't a well-oiled machine of control. They were just people. People who didn't actually know what the hell they were doing anymore. And somehow he was at the center of it. The muffled arguing on the communicator grew louder, escalating into an all-out bureaucratic meltdown. The burly officer shifted uncomfortably, turning away from the group like that would somehow make them disappear. His grip on the device tightened, his patience thinning. Then, a new voice cut through the static like a gunshot. Who the hell is this? Silence. Everyone in the alley felt it. The burly officer blinked, his face flashing pale for just a second. Then he straightened, swallowing hard before answering. Sir, this is Captain Henders, Dominion Security Checkpoint. We have— I know who you are, Henders, the voice snapped. I asked what the hell you're doing. Henders looked at the group again, as if debating how much of the truth to share. Sky, arms folded behind her back, watched him like she already knew the outcome. Eliza tilted her head just slightly, the smirk playing at her lips. Silas, still processing how deep this pit had gotten, stared at the ground. We were ordered not to recognize Admiral Trenholm's authority, sir. A long pause. Then the voice on the other end lowered. Dangerous. Deadly. Controlled fury. Put me on speaker. Henders hesitated, then pressed a button. The communicator crackled. Then, suddenly, the alley was filled with the booming, ice-cold voice of Admiral Dorian Trenholm. This is Admiral Trenholm. Who the hell gave that order? Even Eliza raised her eyebrows at that. Henders licked his lips. Sir, I expect an answer, Captain. Henders cleared his throat. Sir, orders came down from... I don't give a damn where they came from. A pause. Then the Admiral's voice dipped into something darker. Let me make something very clear, Captain. If you continue obstructing a direct military operation, I will personally see to it that your next assignment is guarding a waste disposal facility in the outer colonies. Do you understand me? Silas almost felt bad for the guy. Henders looked like a man watching his career go up in flames. Yes, sir. Then get out of my way. A click. The line went dead. For a second, no one moved. Then Henders rubbed his face, exhaled sharply, and threw his communicator against a nearby dumpster. It shattered. He turned back to his men, pointing a thick finger at them. Stand down. Skye didn't say a word. She simply stepped forward and walked past him. Eliza let out a low whistle, shaking her head before nudging Silas forward. Guess we're going, honey. Henders didn't stop them. Didn't say another word. Just stood there, watching his career burn in real time. Next chapter. The Corps assembles. The steam chopper rumbled through the night sky, cutting through the thick, low-hanging clouds like a blade. The scent of heated metal and pressurized steam filled the cabin, mixing with the faint hum of machinery. Silas sat between two realities. On his left, Skye. Her glow had dimmed to a low pulse, but it never truly left. She sat upright, her hands folded neatly on her lap, watching the world pass beneath them through the reinforced windows. No emotion, no tension, just presence. On his right, Eliza, still smirking like she'd just pulled off some great con, though her arms were folded and her foot tapped absently against the metal floor. Unlike Skye, she didn't pretend to be calm. She was coiled energy waiting to strike or laugh at something. Silas? He had nothing left but questions, and not enough alcohol. The ride was mercifully short. When the chopper finally touched down, the doors hissed open, releasing a wave of heat into the cool night air. They were at a military outpost, smaller than a main base, but secured with high steel walls and rows of soldiers moving in tight, efficient patterns. This wasn't a place for bureaucracy. This was a place for action. Skye stepped out first, her glow casting long shadows across the landing pad. Silas followed, then Eliza, her boots clanking against the grated metal ramp as they descended. Waiting at the bottom, a trio stood under the harsh floodlights. Ezekiel Watts, tall, sharp-eyed, with the weight of command hanging off him like an old coat. His posture was strictly military, but his gaze wasn't cold. It was calculating, like he was already measuring what they brought to the table. Cogwave, a presence that immediately stood out. His form gleamed under the lights, the subtle glow of arcane machinery pulsing in his joints and along the synthetic ridges of his face. His head tilted slightly, not in curiosity, but in a way that suggested he was already reading them, already knowing more than he let on. And Snow, the one who didn't quite belong in this world. She wasn't in a uniform. She wasn't armored. She sat on the edge of a low railing, her bare feet swinging lightly above the ground, dressed in soft, flowing fabrics, a black dress with multiple red roses along the hem, clothes that looked like they belonged in a different reality entirely. Her presence was gentle, but it wasn't weak. Her skin seemed to shift in the light, sometimes solid, sometimes faintly translucent, like she was slipping between this world and another. And her eyes, warm, deep, knowing. When she looked at Silas, he had the strangest feeling she saw everything about him in that instant. Not his rank, not his orders. Him. Zeke was the first to speak. His gaze flicked between Skye, Eliza, and Silas. Then, with no hesitation, no introductions, he simply asked, "So which one of you is going to be the biggest pain in my ass?" Eliza didn't hesitate, didn't flinch, didn't let even a flicker of irritation cross her face at Zeke's blunt question. Instead, she smiled, not her usual smirk, not sharp, not teasing, a warmer smile. A genuine one. The switch was instant. The casual, dangerous woman from the bar was gone. In her place, a soldier, a companion, someone who belonged here, someone who was just as invested in the mission as they were. She stepped forward, tilting her head with a soft chuckle. "Oh, I hope that won't be me, Captain." Her voice was lighter, the smoothness of someone who had been on teams before, who knew how to blend in. Friendly, trustworthy. Zeke didn't react at first. His eyes flicked to Skye, then to Silas, like he was checking for a tell, some reaction that would clue him in to whether or not this woman was for real. Skye, ever unreadable, gave nothing. Silas, still unsteady, just frowned slightly. Eliza kept going, carefully picking her words. "I know my presence here is unexpected, but if I can be of use, I'd like to be." She meant every word, just not in the way they thought. Because Eliza's mission had changed. She had no intention of leaving. No intention of failing. She had just become an enemy on the inside. And if they thought they had her figured out, they were already losing. The military base buzzed with controlled efficiency, soldiers moving between steel-plated corridors, the hum of data terminals filling the air. The walls were lined with mission briefings, schematics, and logistics reports. But Skye barely looked at them as she walked with purpose toward the Admiral's office. She had been patient. She had been quiet. But now it was time for clarity. As she reached the Admiral's door, it slid open before she could knock. Admiral Dorian Trenholm stood behind his desk, hands clasped behind his back, his expression as unreadable as ever. He already knew why she was here. Skye stepped inside, the blue light around her pulsing slightly, just enough to remind him who he was dealing with. "I need a moment." The Admiral gestured to the chair across from him, but Skye remained standing. "I'm here to assess the situation and report back to my people," she said evenly. "Not get caught up in some internal military conflict?" Trenholm raised an eyebrow. Skye didn't let him respond. It could have come to conflict out there. Her voice was level, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. The Admiral finally exhaled, tapping a few controls on his desk to mute all surveillance feeds in the room. The hum of active monitoring systems went silent. A private conversation. Trenholm sat down, folding his hands in front of him. "I understand your concerns." Skye remained still, waiting, measuring. Trenholm leaned forward slightly. "But let's be clear. That wasn't just internal military conflict. That was a deliberate attempt to block a mission sanctioned at the highest level." Skye's light pulsed again. "And?" Trenholm's eyes narrowed just slightly. "And if they're willing to do that, it means something bigger is happening." Skye tilted her head. "Bigger than your own interdepartmental failures?" The Admiral's jaw twitched, but he didn't rise to the bait. He sighed instead, rubbing his temple before leaning back in his chair. For a brief moment, he looked more exhausted than authoritative. "The chain of command is breaking down," he admitted. "What happened out there was just one piece of it. There's a power struggle happening behind the scenes, one that's pushing us towards something worse." Skye didn't respond, waiting for him to finish. "Soon, it won't just be jurisdictional disputes. It won't just be bureaucratic blockades. If this keeps up, it's going to escalate into open war." The words hung heavy in the room. Skye exhaled through her nose. "A civil war?" Trenholm nodded once. "Exactly." A silence stretched between them before he continued, his voice lower now. "I'm sorry you had to get involved in this." His eyes met hers, firm but not unkind. "But that's the life of a soldier, isn't it? You go where you're needed. You fight the battles you didn't sign up for." Skye's expression didn't change, but for a moment the glow around her dimmed slightly. Then, with no change in expression, no change in tone, she simply said, "Noted." She turned without another word, stepping out of the office. The door slid shut behind her, sealing the conversation away. Next chapter, The Machine and the Fractures. The briefing hall was packed. Military brass, intelligence officers, and field operatives sat at long metallic tables, the room humming with quiet tension. The walls were lined with holographic displays, maps, and classified documents projected in soft blue light. At the front of the room stood Silas March, looking more at home here than anywhere else. He wasn't shuffling awkwardly, wasn't lost in the politics or power struggles around him. Here, in front of a massive drawing board, he belonged, a scholar among soldiers. He adjusted his thin-rimmed glasses, coughed once, then tapped the board with his knuckle. Behind him, a massive map flickered to life, displaying a detailed layout of the excavation site. He lifted a laser pointer, the red dot hovering over the image of an old reinforced lab. "Professor Aldous Thornwell." His voice carried easily through the room, steady and practiced. Brilliant, radical, obsessive. His secret wasn't just advanced physics or engineering. It was something more. It was the merging of the occult with science. Murmurs rippled through the room, but no one interrupted. Silas clicked a button on his control panel, and a grainy image of a massive metallic structure appeared on the screen. A machine was unearthed in this area. He pointed the laser to the center of the map. "I believe this was dug up 50 years ago and immediately shrouded in secret military control." He coughed again, clearing his throat. His scientific advisors and funding came from both the military and private multinationals. He let that hang in the air for a second. No one looked surprised. They already knew. But his secret, Silas continued, was occult knowledge. More murmurs. A few raised eyebrows. He wasn't surprised. Half of the people in this room had probably spent their careers dismissing the idea of magic as nonsense. That was Thornwell's advantage. Silas clicked again, revealing a picture of an older woman in an elegant black coat, her piercing gaze sharp even in a still image. He believed there was real science hidden in what he called superstitious nonsense, and his top advisor, you may all know of. Silas turned slightly, scanning the room before finishing. Dr. Cassandra Etherlight. That got a reaction. A ripple of recognition, whispers. Even the most hardened skeptics in the room knew that name. Silas let them process it before continuing. She has followers everywhere. Cultists, scientists, scholars, people who believe she holds the key to unlocking something greater. And frankly, he let out a dry chuckle. I've had my own run-ins with her followers. He clicked again, bringing up an old, weathered sketch of an elaborate circular device with strange carvings. The machine needed a key to activate. Silas let the words sink in. Then he turned back to the room. Years of research, both mystical and scientific, pointed to one location for the key's resting place. A new image filled the screen, a landscape covered in swirling, unnatural mist. The land of green mist. The room fell silent. Even the skeptics stopped whispering. Silas took a breath, his fingers tightening around the laser pointer. I was sent in to retrieve it. He let that hang in the air. No one spoke. Then, with measured control, he finished. I was successful. A few shifts in seats, the quiet scratch of a pen. Silas inhaled, exhaled. And then finally, the key was used, and the disruptions began. The room remained still. No shifting papers, no quiet murmurs, no interruptions. Only Silas March, standing at the front, his voice steady despite the weight of what he was about to say. He tapped his laser pointer against the edge of the massive drawing board. It was unknown to me what the machine's activation would do. He let that hang for a second. It is unknown if Professor Thornwell knew. The statement was almost worse, because the idea that Thornwell had built something so powerful without knowing its true purpose, that was a terrifying possibility. Silas inhaled, turning slightly, scanning the room. He was speaking now not just to military officials, but to scholars, tacticians, and the highest-ranking minds in the field. And yet none of them had the answers, only the consequences. As we have all seen, he continued, the machine's activation has caused occurrences both localized and throughout the local community of dimensions and realms. That got a few reactions. People shifting, eyes narrowing. There was no denying it now. Whatever had happened, it was not contained. Silas let his gaze linger for a second on Sky. He didn't have to say it outright. She was proof of that. The most advanced realm, the kind that had pushed far beyond where humanity stood today, had sent her here. Not to negotiate, not to interfere with politics, to investigate. Sky didn't react, not outwardly, but her glow pulsed. Silas moved on, clicking the display again. Images flashed across the massive screen behind him. Blurry, strange footage of city skylines appearing and reappearing in unnatural patterns. Buildings that existed one moment and were gone the next. A woman in a marketplace screaming as her reflection in a mirror showed her a different person entirely. A mechanical automaton, previously decommissioned, suddenly walking on its own, its gears turning with no visible power source. Fractures, appearing out of nowhere, floating in alleyways, splitting through deserts, slicing into space itself. And then, finally, the satellite image of the machine, or rather the crater where it used to be. Silas exhaled. And of course, he said softly, the machine that destroyed 2 cities. The air in the room turned leaden. Even those who had already known the truth felt the weight of those words. Because now it was spoken aloud. Now it was real. Silas stepped back. There was nothing more to add. The damage was already done. Now, the only question was, what the hell do they do next? The moment Silas finished speaking, the room detonated into noise. Shouting, accusations, arguments overlapping arguments. This was no longer a briefing. This was a battlefield. A high-ranking commander slammed his fist on the table. March needs to be arrested immediately. He admitted he retrieved the key. He triggered this. A corporate representative scoffed, leaning back in his chair. And what? Pretend that fixes anything? The damage is done. Now, the real question is, what can be salvaged? Another military official turned on him. Salvaged? You want to turn this into a damn business opportunity? The corporate rep just shrugged. The realms are shifting. New resources, new technology. If you don't think the private sector is going to take advantage, you're naive. You're a parasite. And you're a fool if you think a solution doesn't have a price tag. Silas stood there, stiff as a statue. He had knew this moment would come, but watching it unfold? That was something else entirely. Another voice cut in from across the room. A scientist, voice shaking, still clutching a datapad in both hands. Forget politics, we need solutions. We need to seal the fractures, stabilize reality before more collapses occur. A man in priest-like robes snapped back. You think this is science? You think this is something you can patch? He gestured wildly at the screens. This is divine punishment. We should be focusing on atonement, not patchwork fixes. Atonement? We're past that, someone else barked. The volume in the room kept rising. Get the galactic collective involved. No, this stays internal. The collective doesn't care. We need to weaponize the rifts before someone else does. Are you insane? We barely understand them. More research. More time. There is no time. It was falling apart. No order, no control. Just fear, greed, desperation, every possible angle colliding into a cacophony of voices. Then a sharp, thunderous clap echoed through the hall. The sound of a single hand slamming down on metal. Loud. Final. Silas flinched. The argument stopped. All heads turned toward the front of the room, to Admiral Dorian Trenholm. His hand rested flat against the steel briefing table. His expression unreadable, his presence absolute. The air seemed to shrink. Not because he raised his voice. Not because he glared, threatened, or barked orders, but because he was the Admiral. And when he spoke, they listened. His voice was calm, unshaken, absolute. Enough. The room froze. The tension was still there, coiled and unspent, hovering just beneath the surface. But the noise, the chaos, gone. Trenholm lifted his hand from the table, fingers flexing slightly before he folded them behind his back. He let the silence settle, let them feel it. Then, when he spoke again, his tone was measured. This is not a debate. This is not a corporate boardroom or a political chamber. This is a military operation. His gaze swept the room. And right now we are losing. A few glances were exchanged. Some of the more arrogant officials shifted, but said nothing. Trenholm didn't blink. I do not have the patience for personal grievances, religious theory, or profit margins. His voice never rose, but each word felt like a hammer striking metal. I don't care what you believe caused this. I care about stopping it. Silas exhaled slowly, forcing himself to keep steady. Trenholm turned slightly, his eyes landing on Zeke. Captain, do you have a team? Zeke straightened slightly. Yes, sir. Then get them ready. We are done talking. But before the room could absorb those words, the double doors slammed open. Colonel Vance Aldrich strode in, flanked by Dominion security officers. His boots clanked against the metal floor, his face twisted in barely contained outrage. What in the holy hell is going on here? The tension in the room spiked again. Aldrich scanned the crowd, eyes locking onto the Admiral. I should have been notified of this meeting, Admiral. He stepped in without hesitation, without care for the spectacle, his presence a deliberate act of defiance. Trenholm didn't even flinch. The room, which had just begun to settle, ignited again. Laughter, scoffs, discontented murmurs. Half of the room wanted to see Aldrich put in his place, while the other half saw an opportunity to shift the blame. Aldrich wasn't finished. Did you think I wouldn't find out? I have ears in every room, Admiral, and don't you forget it. I should have been briefed before this turned into a damn circus. Trenholm smirked. And then he did something no one expected. He laughed, a short, calculated chuckle. And then from somewhere in the back, a second laugh joined. Then another, and another, until a round of laughter erupted, filling the briefing hall with the kind of chaos that wasn't panic but amusement. At Aldrich, at his fury, his failure to control the situation. Aldrich's face darkened, his fingers tightening into fists. Trenholm tilted his head, voice laced with something almost mocking. Don't worry, Colonel. We have the presentation on video. More laughter. And in the background of it all, Silas just stood there, watching, knowing that this wasn't even the real battle. Not yet. The briefing hall was still echoing with laughter when Zeke slipped out. He wasn't interested in watching Aldrich try to save face. That wasn't his problem. This was. He led the core group into a secured room, one of the older debriefing areas. Low lighting, thick metal walls, no listening devices. Just a circular table and the people who actually mattered. Zeke, Cogwave, Sky, Silas, Eliza. And then Snow entered, her soft steps barely making a sound. Abby was with her, holding her hand one over the other, like she was guiding a child across a busy street. Zeke exhaled, leaning forward, hands braced on the table. All right, his eyes swept over the group. You've seen the shit show yourselves. We have full authority to solve this, at least non-Dominion authority. He let that settle. I need ideas. Silence. Then Sky spoke. She leaned against the table, arms crossed, expression unreadable. I'm not staying here forever. The words were sharp, final. She wasn't hostile about it. She was just stating fact. She had a job to do. And this wasn't it. Zeke gave a small nod. Yeah, I understand. Then Cogwave spoke. The synthetic's head tilted slightly, the lights along his frame pulsing in a slow, calculated rhythm. Logic suggests we should seek a scientific explanation. His tone was even, as always. If this is a machine, then it is bound by laws, mechanical, theoretical, and observable. It can be studied, measured, it can be undone. Zeke rubbed his jaw, considering that. Then Snow spoke. She lifted her head slowly, her expression still calm, but her eyes holding something deeper, something that no one else in the room carried. She spoke softly, but the words carried. The answer lies in the stars, she said. In prophecy. A weight settled over the room. Not one of shock, not one of disbelief, but one of knowing. Because for all the science, all the technology, all the research, there was something else beneath it all. Something older, something that had been waiting. Zeke exhaled. All right. He looked at each of them. Then let's figure out which of you is right. The room was still heavy with Snow's words, the weight of prophecy lingering in the air. Zeke sat motionless, fingers drumming lightly against the table, his mind turning over every possible angle, every meaning behind what had just been spoken. Then Eliza smiled. Not her usual smirk. Not sharp. Not teasing. Something easier. Smoother. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, eyes sweeping over the group. I can be of use. Zeke's gaze snapped to her. She met it without hesitation, her expression open, relaxed. Like she belonged here. Former military, top of my class, counterintelligence specialist, served in Blackridge, Orange Divide, and the Duskfront conflict before my honorable discharge. A beat. Expert in small arms fire and use of dual blades, top of my class, Captain. Silas's gaze flickered toward her, but he said nothing. Cogwave's lights blinked in silent analysis. Sky didn't react, not visibly. But she was listening. And Snow? She was watching. Just watching. Eliza held her posture steady. Let the silence stretch just enough. Zeke studied her, his expression unreadable. Then he gave a slow nod. All right. The acceptance was simple, neutral. But Eliza didn't need anything more than that. The quarters assigned to Silas and Eliza were barely lived in. Military efficiency at its finest plain walls. A cot, a desk, a locked weapons locker. Nothing personal. Nothing real. Except for the tension that settled between them now. Silas sat on the edge of the cot, elbows on his knees, fingers laced together. His thoughts were moving too fast, his mind piecing things together in a way it should have done sooner. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. Counterintelligence, Blackridge, Orange Divide, the Duskfront conflict. A pause. When were you going to tell me about all this? Eliza, still standing, still calm, tilted her head slightly. Her response wasn't defensive. Not even surprised. Eventually, she admitted, shrugging slightly. It just never came up. She leaned against the desk, crossing her arms, watching him with that same easy, unreadable gaze. You've seemed so worried and tense these past few weeks. I didn't want to lay too much on you. Silas let out a short, humorless laugh. Right, because keeping me in the dark was going to help with that? Eliza sighed, her smile fading just slightly. It wasn't about keeping you in the dark, Silas. He raised an eyebrow. No? She shook her head, stepping forward, closing the space between them. I was protecting you. The words should have reassured him. They didn't. Silas held her gaze, searching for something behind her carefully neutral expression. For months, Eliza had been a mystery, a puzzle he was never quite sure if he wanted to solve. And now it felt like he had been reading the wrong pieces entirely. His voice came quieter this time. What else aren't you telling me? Eliza didn't answer immediately. And that silence? That told him more than any response ever could. The next afternoon, Eliza found Zeke outside, watching Sky and Cogwave spar. They were in a holding pattern, waiting for more intel to come down from command, waiting for the next fracture report, waiting for the team itself to settle, to adjust to one another before any serious next step could be taken. There was strategy in that. Let the edges smooth out before the blade swings. A lot could change in a day, but not Zeke. Not the way he stood there, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the match unfolding before him. Sky moved like lightning, her blue energy blade carving streaks of light through the air. Cogwave shifted like liquid steel, his body adjusting, twisting mechanical plates reforming mid-strike. 1 second he had an armored guard absorbing Sky's attack. The next, that same armor snapped into razor-edge tendrils, forcing Sky to adjust on the fly. It was rhythm against chaos, speed versus adaptation. And Zeke? He was absorbing every second of it. Eliza exhaled slowly, resetting herself. She had spent the last day preparing, getting her story straight. Now it was time to deliver it. She stepped up beside him, speaking without hesitation. "I have to go home." Zeke didn't react, didn't even glance at her. His arms remained folded, expression neutral. Eliza didn't let it shake her. "Gather some things. Tie up a few loose ends." She shrugged lightly. "I'll be back." The battle in front of them continued. Sky twisted, redirecting Cogwave's attack, her blade flashing dangerously close to his shifting armor. Zeke finally spoke. "How long?" Eliza tilted her head as if thinking. "A few days." Still, he didn't move, didn't turn, didn't question. Finally, he let out a slow exhale through his nose and nodded. "All right, no conditions, no resistance." And that threw her off. For just a second. Then she smiled, recovering smoothly. Her voice was light, teasing. "Try not to miss me too much." Then with a wink, "Ta-ta, dear." Zeke didn't return the smile, didn't look at her, just kept watching the fight. Eliza turned, walking away, her pace measured and steady. Her heartbeat remained even, but in the back of her mind, one thought repeated, that was too easy. The train ride out of the base was quiet. Military transport, functional, fast, and no questions asked. Eliza sat by the window, one boot resting casually on the seat across from her, arms folded, eyes half-lidded as the landscape blurred past. Steam towers, factory lines, the skeletal remains of cities rebuilt too many times to remember. She wasn't going home, not really. Not the way someone says it like it means comfort. She was going where the pieces of her life were stored, where the lies were kept tidy. The city skyline sharpened as the train pulled in, iron spires clawing at the gray sky, their reflections shimmering in the oil-slick water beneath the bridges. Eliza stepped off the platform without ceremony. No one met her. She didn't expect anyone to. The apartment was still where she had left it. Clean, sharp, functional. A second-floor walk-up in the industrial quarter, tucked between a freight line and a row of automated factories. Safe enough and forgettable enough. She keyed in the security code at the door, hearing the familiar click of the lock disengage. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and oil. The walls were bare. No photos. No art. Just a few essential things. A weapons rack along one side. A communications terminal, still powered down. A travel bag already half-packed by the door. Eliza dropped her coat onto the back of the chair, rolled her shoulders once, then crossed the room to the locker near the far wall. She knelt, pressing her palm flat against the scan pad. The lock hissed, releasing. Inside, credentials. A series of sealed envelopes marked with codes. And at the bottom, a small case, worn but well kept. She lifted it out carefully, flipping the latches open. Inside, nestled against dark padding, were the twin blades. Perfectly balanced. Polished. Familiar. She ran her fingers along the hilt of one, her gaze softening for just a moment. Then she snapped the case shut again. "Few days," she said softly. Eliza moved to the bedroom, the quiet of the apartment pressing in around her like a held breath. She knelt by the edge of the bed, reaching beneath it until her fingers found what she was looking for. The music box was small, polished wood worn at the corners, the brass key at its base still bright. She wound it slowly, listening to the faint click of the mechanism, then set it on the counter near the window. The soft, delicate tune began to play, filling the space with a sound that didn't belong in a room like this, a melody too gentle for a life built on sharp edges. Eliza turned away from it, pulling a few outfits from the closet, folding them with practiced care and placing them into the open suitcase on the bed. As she reached for one of the smaller bags tucked at the back of the shelf, something slipped free and fluttered to the floor. She crouched, picking it up between two fingers, an envelope sealed by habit, not necessity. When she opened it, a folded letter slid into her palm, worn at the edges where it had been read too many times. But it wasn't the letter that caught her first. A small photograph had fallen out along with it, landing face up on the floor. The picture was old, a little faded, a black and white cat mid-pounce, caught in the moment of losing its footing, one paw reaching awkwardly as if trying to correct the fall. Scrawled in quick ink along the bottom corner of the photo, "Runt misses you too." Eliza picked it up carefully, brushing her thumb once across the cat's tiny, panicked expression. She stared at it for a long time, then unfolded the letter. The handwriting was familiar. Quick, looping script, easy to recognize even after all this time. Miss you much. You always know my number. Shelley. Eliza didn't smile, didn't sigh. Just stood there, holding the letter and the photo like they were more fragile than they looked. After a moment, she folded the letter back into the envelope, tucked the photo gently inside, and placed it between two shirts in the suitcase. The music box continued its soft, repeating melody. Eliza didn't unpack the rest of the bag. She didn't check for any mail or messages. She just lay back on the bed, eyes half closed, listening to the quiet spin of the music box as it played her to sleep. Next chapter, Eliza was gone. And for now, no one was thinking about her. The team had work to do. The next few days were filled with preparation. More sparring, more refining, more pushing limits. Skye and Cogwave weren't the only ones training anymore. Zeke joined in. So did Silas. Even Snow, though her training was more about understanding her own limits than combat. One morning, Skye and Zeke faced off in the sparring circle. Zeke was a brawler, all grit and power, his movements honed from years of real fights. Skye was precision. She didn't waste a step, didn't waste a strike. Her energy blade hummed as she sidestepped Zeke's heavy swings with ease. She was faster, sharper. But Zeke could take a hit and keep coming. And when Skye miscalculated just slightly, just enough, Zeke caught her wrist and wrenched her into a counter. She barely twisted out of it, landing in a low crouch, breathing hard. She smirked, but there was respect in her eyes. "Not bad, Captain." Zeke rolled his shoulder, exhaling through his nose. "You're fast," Skye just shrugged. "You're stubborn." Meanwhile, Silas and Snow weren't fighting. They were experimenting. Snow was different. Her half-alive, half-dead state meant she couldn't be hurt traditionally. A bullet would pass through her, unless she was fully in her physical form. She could shift between states at will, but it took concentration. Silas, ever the scientist, watched her with fascination. "So, how does it feel when you shift?" he asked one afternoon. Snow, sitting cross-legged on a training mat, tilted her head. "Like being in two places at once." Silas scribbled in his notebook. "And when you touch something?" Snow reached forward, pressing a hand against his sleeve, but he didn't feel it. She smiled softly, like reaching for something that isn't quite real. Silas nodded slowly, absorbing the information. "We need to test this in the field," he muttered. "See how it works in high-stress environments." Snow just watched him. As the days stretched on, the urgency grew. The fractures were still spreading, and Snow's cryptic words lingered. "The answer lies in the stars, in prophecy." Zeke knew it was almost time. Time to find the one person who might have seen all of this coming. Dr. Cassandra Etherlight, the prophet. Skye sat alone on the rooftop of the barracks, staring out at the dark horizon. She had been here every night at exactly 2:55 a.m. waiting. It had become ritual. Same place, same hour, one steady habit in the middle of everything else falling apart. At precisely 3 a.m., the faint hum of her communicator vibrated against her palm, and the screen flickered to life. She tapped it, her hand steady, though she already felt the tightening in her chest. The voice on the other end came soft, familiar. "Skye, your mother wants to talk with you." A second later, the screen shifted, and there she was, her mother's face filling the frame, older than Skye remembered, tired around the eyes, but still her, still home. Skye felt her throat tighten, but she didn't speak. Her mother's gaze softened, but there was trouble beneath it, weighing down the warmth. She hesitated before she said the words. "Honey, I hate to have to tell you this." A pause. "But your friend Nova," Skye's stomach dropped. The air thinned around her. She already knew what was coming. She was killed in combat with insurgents. It happened recently. Skye didn't move, didn't breathe. Her mother's voice softened further, trying to close the distance between them. But Skye was already half gone, halfway between the present and memory. One of her final requests was for you. A soft chime broke the quiet, a file downloaded into her device, the symbol blinking at the corner of the screen. Her mother tried again, voice cracking just slightly. "Honey, I am so..." The screen cut out. 2 minutes. Gone. Skye sat there, gripping the communicator as if holding on tighter might bring it back. As if sheer will alone could keep the line open a second longer. But it didn't. The device stayed dark, quiet. She closed the screen slowly, blinking hard, breath shallow. Then, without a word, she reached into the inside pocket of her jacket and pulled out something small, something she had kept close for longer than she cared to admit. A blue handkerchief. Nova's. She pressed it against her face, her shoulders sinking just slightly as the first tear fell. Then another, but she didn't sob, didn't collapse. She stayed upright, still, the tears silent as they came, because this was the only moment she would give herself. The only space where grief was allowed. A soft rustling near the rooftop's edge caught her ear. Skye lifted her head, wiping her face roughly with the back of her sleeve. In the far corner, perched like it had been waiting all along, sat the cat, the same scrappy, street-smart thing that had shown up here nearly every night. At first it had kept its distance, watching from the shadows, unmoved. But over time, Skye had started bringing scraps. A bit of fish, a piece of bread, a small offering to a creature that asked for nothing but stayed anyway. Tonight, the cat didn't come forward for food. It simply sat, tail flicking, head tilted, eyes locked on her. Not curious, not impatient, just watching, as if it understood, as if it was holding space. Skye let out a soft, broken laugh. "Yeah," she whispered, voice hoarse. "Me too." She reached into her pocket, pulling out one of the extra snacks she kept for nights like this, and tossed it gently toward the cat. The cat padded forward, took the offering, then settled down nearby. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to stay. And for the first time since the screen had gone dark, Skye didn't feel entirely alone.
Fleeting moment, then you're gone. Words echo, scream, no turn back on. I sit beneath the silent sky, waiting where the shadows lie. Every night, time stands still, quiet hum, fleeting thrill. Your voice was here, then slipped away. Whispers lost in yesterday, a name of fate, a broken line. Now I'm left with borrowed time. Fleeting moment to remember, fleeting moment to let go. Fleeting moment, heard your name before the night swallows the glow. I reach but touch the empty air. The silence lingers everywhere. Fleeting moment, then you're gone, but I'm still here, I carry on. A handkerchief held tight in hand, a memory written in the sand. No cries, no screams, just quiet pain. A tear that falls like whispered rain. Ooh, ooh. Your voice was here, then slipped away. A whisper lost in yesterday, a name of fate, a broken line. And now I'm left with borrowed time. Fleeting moment to remember, fleeting moment to let go. Fleeting moment, heard your name before the night swallows the glow. Whoa, I reach but touch the empty air. The silence lingers everywhere. Fleeting moment, then you're gone, but I'm still here, I carry on. Rustling sound, quiet stare, golden eyes, oh hollow air. No words are said, She just knows how loss can haunt the ones it holds.